Welcome, everyone, to the Responsible Bytes podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things safe and responsible technology. I'm your host, Dr. Zena Assad, and today we are joined by Nikki Chowdhury, who is the digital audience lead at Vogue, GQ, and Vogue Living. Welcome to the podcast, Nikki.
So happy to be here.
So happy to have you here. And I know it's a very, very busy time for you because you are in the lead up to Vogue Codes. And for those who don't know about Vogue Codes, it's an annual conference that you do, which is kind of the intersection of basically Vogue and the fashion industry and technology, which are two things that I think most people wouldn't think come together. Can you chat to me a little bit about how those two things intersect?
Yes, so Vogue Codes was kind of fashioned to bring up the topic of women in STEM primarily and to help women not only kind of get the word out about interesting projects they're working on and the jobs that they're currently in, as well as kind of inspiring young people who are still at university to kind of take on these roles in STEM and to, I guess, highlight emerging skills, emerging jobs, and emerging industries. And Vogue to me feels like a natural fit there because I mean all things fashion, fashion is all about kind of looking forward and taking risks and basically bringing voices that are off the center to the kind of main stage and giving them an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the world that they know that we might not know about. So it's in its 10th year.
Wow,
So
10 years, really?
10 years now, and I've been working on it for
Okay.
4 years. So I've had the privilege of meeting so many amazing women like yourself
The
through the kind of,
fanciest event I've been to by far.
oh, it's a very fancy tech event. And I think that's kind of the fun and
It
probably
was fun.
also the unique selling point of Vogue Codes is that it is kind of saying like technology doesn't need to be a men's club. It doesn't need to be fashioned after men. It can be colorful and interesting and have elements that are fun and frivolous, like tarot card readers, as well as talking about really important things like warships and NASA and kind of the future of AI and medtech. And it's an exciting kind of project to work on. So this year's theme is powering potential, the tech shaping future horizons, and it's basically about the next kind of decade in tech, with everything from finance to medicine to just jobs in STEM.
That's really exciting. You know, on the bit that you're talking about, that technology doesn't have to be male centric. And I'm sorry if this offends anyone. I promise it's not supposed to be, but I refuse to wear a pantsuit. You will not catch me dead in one. And I remember going to this event and I had this supervisor at the time and she was my first female supervisor. And I was like, oh, like I've got to pick an outfit. And she's like, you should wear a pantsuit. And
Oh,
I was like, well, I'm not going to wear a pantsuit. And she's like, no, because this was a male dominated conference as well. I was the only female speaker across 2 days. And she was like, you should wear a pantsuit. And she was coming from a good place, right? Like she was talking about, trying to demonstrate like how serious you are and trying to demonstrate like an element of power and all of these things. But my argument here is why do I have to dress in a pantsuit, which is something traditionally a man would wear, in order to emulate those things? And so I remember when I did attend Vogue Codes, which was, I think, 2 years ago maybe, I wore my floweriest dress. It was a white dress with flowers all over it because I was like,
amazing.
I'm not wearing this pantsuit and I'm going to embrace how feminine this event is. And it was so much fun.
Oh, it's honestly, I think there's a lot of credence to what you said about she meant well. And I
She
think a
did.
lot of the women in our past have had to kind of have this close proximity to maleness in order to be seen as an authority figure. And, we have over generations learned to speak a certain way to be taken seriously, act a certain way, dress a certain way. And I think we have done that because we needed to survive, and that's how you survived. And we're reaching a point, I think, in our timeline where we don't have to play by those rules anymore. And that's a good thing. It means that we can be kind of seen as full human beings, not necessarily just like
Hmm.
we're in a pantsuit, so we're taking seriously. It's about what we're talking about. It's about our accomplishments, and it's about so much more than just looking like a man and sounding like a man. And I think this is a pretty interesting conversation because I think a lot of women in leadership roles in the past have had to depend on that
Yeah.
proximity to maleness in order to get ahead. So when that advice comes down and trickles down, it does come from a place of like learned experiences, but it doesn't necessarily need to be our experience now.
I agree with you entirely. And she really did mean well, but I remember telling her, I'm disappointed I'm the only woman across the board for 2 days, like the only female speaker. But that doesn't mean that I need to change to blend in. I'm already going to not blend in by virtue of the fact that I'm the only female speaker across 2 days. And
Exactly.
I kind of wanted to lean into it and embrace it. And I didn't end up wearing a pantsuit for that event. I didn't go as bold as the white floral dress I wore to Vogue Codes, but I didn't wear a pantsuit. And it didn't really matter at the
And I
end of the
don't think
day.
it will in a while as well. I think the world is changing, and it's changing despite a lot of people trying very hard to make it not change. And it's a power move in a way to exist as yourself, not even as a woman, but as yourself, and acting in a way that is true to yourself and dressing in a way that's true to yourself, and not necessarily having to wear a pantsuit or even dress in a particularly feminine way. It is really about the individual and what the individual brings to the table. And that's a lot more than your outfits. And I say that as someone who works in fashion. Like, fashion is an incredible armor. It's an incredible confidence booster. But it can also be used to kind of control the way you're perceived. And
Yeah.
I think when we live in a world where that often means acting like a man and dressing like a man and being more masculine, I think it is actually a power move to show up in the white dress, in the white floral dress, and have just as much to say. That's important and worth listening to.
I agree entirely. And I definitely felt very, very happy and empowered after that particular event. But speaking of the fashion industry, now we're seeing AI kind of intersect every industry, really, the fashion industry being one of them. And there are the obvious intersections around the business side of things. But what about the creative side? Where are we seeing AI and technology in general kind of seeping into the fashion industry on the creative side?
Yeah, so I think AI has a lot of potential to kind of open up the creative process in fashion. And one of the ways it can do this is obviously by taking huge amounts of data. So past collections, current trends, and even emerging cultural signals. And it can help designers come up with new ideas kind of at scale. Um, and that's a huge kind of time saving and resource saving tool. The other thing is that that sort of accessibility is quite exciting if you're an emerging designer and you don't have access to those more high level design tools that have been available to people who really only have really big budgets and access to kind of traditional fashion infrastructure. But there is kind of the catch with that. And in my opinion, it's a pretty big one, which is most of the really powerful AI tools out there are controlled by a very small handful of big tech companies. Microsoft owns a big chunk of OpenAI. They've locked its commercial use. So all of these AI companies kind of have these walled gardens of sorts. And there's a book, I'm not sure if you've read it, but it's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. It's by Shoshana Zuboff.
I
And
haven't read it, but I know the book.
it's so interesting. And it's basically about how data extraction is kind of what we're giving to these companies in exchange for the use of these products for free. And I do think that does pose a kind of moral dilemma for fashion brands. This data can kind of nudge user behavior. So it means that fashion brands can get much better at kind of figuring out the emotional and psychological things that drive people to purchase certain things. Um, but it kind of also means that over time, it might become quite lacking in differentiation. It'll be quite homogenous. The designs coming through might be quite homogenous. So there is this kind of big power that AI has to kind of revolutionize creativity in this way. You have a lot more drafts at speed. You have a lot more kind of basically interns at speed who can kind of do a lot of the grunt work, do the research, get some drafts out. But it does raise the question, if all of these companies are using the same AI tools behind the scenes and working with the same engine, so to speak, what happens in a future where everything starts to look the same. So yeah, it's an interesting question because I think it can kind of be seen in two different ways. One, it can create immense amounts of value,
Hmm.
but two, it can create immense amounts of sameness. And fashion industry and the industry at large is built on being unique and being groundbreaking. And I think that does pose a big question for its
So,
usage.
so then I have a question kind of as someone who doesn't work in the fashion industry, I'm someone who's on the other side. And I see a lot of trends come through, and you see a lot of the different companies that all come out with very similar trends because it's trending at that time. And I'm wondering here if AI is the cause of homogeny or if it's the nature of the industry and wanting to jump on a trend to kind of
Yeah.
make your place in that consumer society. So kind of the chicken and the egg, really. So
Yes.
is it that AI is making it more homogenous, or is it that it's just, the nature of the industry?
I think trends have always existed, right?
Mm.
And in the past, trends have kind of gone from subcultures and youth cultures and then proliferated into luxury spaces. So a lot of big luxury brands used to get their inspiration from these kind of subcultures and these youth groups. You saw that with punk, you saw all that with the 60s mod. Um, but what's kind of happened in the last decade is the introduction of recommendation algorithms. So you have that across TikTok, across Instagram. You have that when you go shopping on an online store. And recommendation algorithms basically take what you already like and give you more of it. And it's useful for a tech brand because obviously it keeps you on the sites for longer. It makes you more engaged. It makes it more personalized, which makes it more fun. Um, but it does have this kind of other side of the coin, which is over time, you see less and less of things that you may not immediately like. And that can be quite limiting, I think, in a creative sense. And it can be quite limiting for fashion because the more sameness you have, the less individuality you have. And I think the way trends move is similar to how it used to move before, but the speed at which it moves is a lot faster. So the rise of these micro trends and the amount of them at one time is very different to what it used to be. So I think there is, this element of trends and the homogeneity that comes from trends has existed in the history of fashion, but it's ramped up to a different level now. Um, and I think there is also a greater pressure to kind of to get involved in trends. There's more pressure to kind of feel like you're part of the in group. Um, if
The
you're,
Pinterest outfit trends. Have you
sorry,
seen them on Instagram and TikTok? Like, I'm going to recreate this Pinterest outfit, and it's
yes,
all over my For You page.
yes, and I mean even just Pinterest in one sense, right? We know about the bias in algorithms. We know
Hmm.
about the lack of women of color, and so when you go on Pinterest and you see, all of these images of kind of Swedish women in oversized shirts and leggings
With a
over
very particular
time.
body shape.
Exactly. Particular
Yeah.
body types, particular skin types, particular looks.
Hmm.
And also
Particular
I think
hair,
hair, class, like there is all these
everything.
um kind of an intricacy of different elements, but you're kind of still getting this sameness. And I think you kind of see that reflected in recommendation algorithms to an extent because that is the look that works. And why we like that look can be attributed to a lot of cultural influences. I mean, colonialism is a big one I think we can mention.
Wanting
Um,
to fit in, just that need of being like, I want to be a part of the crowd. I want to look the way this person looks. I want to feel the way
exactly.
this person feels. And
So,
so I made a deal with myself last year that that I broke. I said this on another episode, but anyway, so I made this deal with myself last year. I broke it and I've made it again, but I'm not buying any brand new clothes. I'm only
amazing.
buying secondhand clothes. And I've discovered a few things. Number one is I'm not kind of susceptible to trends anymore. So when I look through, I try to look through a quality item that's got really good material. So like cotton or bamboo, not a lot of polyester. And I found that I'm much more experimental with my personal style than I ever was because I have a limited and maybe more diverse set of options. Like I've picked up things off the rack in an op shop that I would never have picked up in a store and been like, maybe it's $7. Maybe this will look great on me.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does. And I feel like it really did change my personal style. But
Yeah.
then I open Instagram and I open my For You page and I see these lovely women with their Pinterest outfits of the day and it doesn't look anything like my wardrobe. And I'm like, I need a new wardrobe. This is
Uh,
not working for me. And it's just this weird mental thing.
That is honestly one of the best ways to put it because I think it's like your individuality versus the algorithm. And that's kind of
Hmm.
what you're dealing with when you use these tools, when you use these websites, when you use these social media platforms. It's your individuality and how resilient it is to constant messaging to be something else. And
Yeah.
that something else is still a version of you. It's what the algorithm has decided you like. Um, but it's not necessarily what you are. And I think that's kind of this really interesting conversation of our decade is like, how do we differentiate between what algorithms say we are and what we know we are? And thrifting is a really an interesting kind of expression of this because when you go into a regular store, you're kind of given a curated kind of
Hmm.
list of products that are in, likely to sell, current, and new. And so your choice is kind of made a little bit easier because you have this kind of social proof that this is in, this is new, this is liked, this is trendy. Um, and it kind of means you can get a little bit lazy with your personal taste. And
Yeah,
when you're
absolutely.
thrifting, you have to lean on your personal taste a lot more. You have to have a lot more confidence in your choice. You have to have your own ideas about color and silhouette and shape in a way that you can kind of relinquish that a little bit when you shop for new clothes.
Hmm.
But I definitely relate to your kind of experience because I had the same thing when I went shopping in Japan and I was kind of exclusively vintage shopping. And I found that my outfits were very different to what I was seeing online. I liked my outfits a lot more. I felt like they were a lot more me. And it was kind of like this creative muscle that doesn't get used when I shop in regular stores. And I think this is kind of representative of the challenge we have with kind of algorithms is the algorithm is the regular store and you are the thrifter in the thrift store.
I love
And
this analogy.
and you need to be very good at seeing what is mine versus what is kind of being sold to me and what is being said is me. And over time, that can actually get a little bit hard to differentiate. I think we know the impact algorithms have on our brains. We know the
Hmm.
impact they have to change the way we shop, change the way we create, change the way we search the web. And you kind of need this constant vigilance in a way.
So I want to touch on this idea of individuality, but maybe from a bit of a different lens. So I've seen the H&M digital twins, and for those
Mm.
who are not aware of it, it's basically models are consenting to an image of them being put through kind of an AI generation tool. So they take the original image and then they're giving consent for that image to be altered through AI tools for other campaigns. And I remember when I first saw this, my immediate thought was, around privacy and security. Maybe they're consenting to the image being altered or amended, but they're not sure to what capacity, right? So if they end up altering the image to include things like a vulgar gesture or a racist banner or something like that, maybe it's not something you originally thought of when you first signed that consent form, but it's something that could happen. And that was my original thought. But now that we're having this conversation, one of the things I'm really thinking about is as a model, I imagine that there's some level of individuality and creativity in the persona that you put forward in your campaigns, right? How much of that do you lose when you're consenting to an image of yourself being amended through AI without not even your consent, but without your contribution, your creative personal identity contribution?
Well, yeah, it completely changes the relationship a model has with their own image and likeness. And
Their
that,
own like
yeah,
personhood.
your own personhood and whenever these kind of technologies come forward you hear a lot about the pros and the pros are kind of like your career will no longer be limited by aging, by sickness, by
Yeah.
location, by a pimple or pregnancy, and that can seem very attractive, and it is attractive
How
in a lot of
sad.
ways, um, but it does kind of change the landscape. It brings, pretty big legal concerns around like the ownership of your image being exploited for things outside of your creative control. What about your autonomy? And how far does your autonomy go when there's a digitally replicated version of you that's acting a different way and maybe supporting a brand that you might not no longer
Yeah.
support? Um, and it also kind of brings into question the modeling industry at large, because there are like a couple of models who have this established brand and they're known for their personality as well as their appearance. But then there's another group of models who make up the large group of models who are kind of valued purely for their utility, like to wear the clothes, to get the photo taken for the e-shop. You don't really know much about their personalities. They don't
Hmm.
really have a brand. They're just a face. And will that group of model even exist in the future? Will modeling kind of be reserved for like this kind of very small group of people who have that established brand and base and personality? And will the rest of the models we see online on billboards just be kind of generated? And that really shifts kind of the labor landscape. It's
Yeah.
kind of a continuation of the devaluing of human labor in one sense. But it also takes a lot of the control away from the model themselves. And I also think this is kind of a thing that a lot of young models will be grappling with is, do I sell my image for the royalties? Is it worth it? Or am I kind of contributing to the loss of my own job in a way? And I think that's a concern for a lot of people. Um, but on the flip side, of course, there's always a flip side. Models are expensive. And for
Hmm.
a lot of emerging brands who may need to kind of compete in this landscape where they're competing with kind of fast fashion brands who have all the money, all the models, all the resources, it can kind of allow those smaller brands to compete at scale. Um, but it does kind of bring in that question about, well, who gets to be a model in this brave new world? Who gets to sell their image and who is replaced by the image of somebody else? Um,
Yeah. There's
so,
also the element of, you were talking about before of they can take this image of you, which is really a snapshot of you at a point in time,
for sure.
and then they can continue to use that even if you change after. And, you were talking about things like aging and pregnancy.
Okay.
And I know this is an issue in the modeling industry, regardless of AI, but it makes me sad that they want someone at one snapshot and one point in time
Mm.
without kind of reflecting the change, especially as women, right? Like one of the things for me is anytime I see a woman in Hollywood or like, very famous woman aging gracefully, she's got wrinkles, she hasn't had Botox, she's got gray hair. I find it so refreshing. And I'm like, that's how I want to age. But at the same time, because we also see other women like Jennifer Lopez, that woman has not aged in 2 decades. I don't know if she's had work done or hasn't had work done, right? But she's stunning. She has not aged in like 2 decades. And I look at her and I'm like, oh my God. So I could look like that when I'm 50. And it kind of gives you this really warped thing of like my mind is in two ways, really. It's in two parts. There's one part of my mind that's like, I want to, embrace aging and age gracefully and be grateful for the privilege of aging. And then there's another part of my mind that's like, I want to look like Jennifer Lopez at 50.
I think that's so
And it's
human,
so
right?
sad.
It's so human though, and it's something that like we are all grappling with, and it is a little bit of a step back in a way, because I think in the last kind of decade we have this real move towards real bodies, real models,
Hmm.
normalizing stretch marks,
Cellulite.
normalizing, cellulite, like things that a normal human body has. And you see that when you go onto these e-shops and the models, there's a variety of models. Now, when models are generated, Will they kind of will they kind of include those human aspects, or will they do away with them? And unfortunately, it seems like they'll do away with them. And they'll do away with them because it becomes profitable for them to do so. And I think this is the other thing. There's no morality in how these things are decided.
Yeah.
They're kind of decided on what sells. And if we like seeing and we respond to the images that look nothing like us and we buy those products, we tell these algorithms that that's what we prefer. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us kind of don't walk the walk, so to speak. So we might say like we want to age gracefully. We might say that we want to be more than our looks and more than, the the outward image of ourselves, but we end up being influenced more by things that look alien to us, that look really aspirational. And so there is this constant kind of battle between like who we want to be and who we kind of end up being. And unfortunately, who we end up being is what trains these algorithms. It's what we click on, it's what we buy, and less what we say. Um, so I'm hoping that, we do come to a point where we get very good at kind of noticing when something is AI generated and there is
Mm-hmm.
policy to support, labeling things as AI. Um,
Watermarks, yeah.
Watermarks. So we're more aware, the same way that we had watermarks for airbrushing, that was introduced. That wasn't a given initially. So
Mm.
we just have to be very good at making sure the policy keeps up with how this is evolving. So it doesn't become exploitative. So it doesn't become something that takes away from our humanity and actually adds to it.
So I want to touch on what you were talking about before about, the person we are and the person we want to be. And I wonder how much social media profiles have
Mm.
factored into that. So when social media first started, I was in high school and Facebook was, oh, actually, no, I think we had MySpace first, which was this ridiculous. I don't know if you remember MySpace, but you
Of
had to like
course,
copy and
yep.
paste the HTML code into
Yep, yep.
to get like some kind of background. It was
The top
ridiculous. But
eight,
anyway,
that was very important to me.
yes, yeah, it was. And you got to put your like, your friends and all this stuff. And anyway, Facebook, I think, was really the better example of the first kind of social media. And at the time, it wasn't monetized and you didn't really have your own personal branding on social
Yeah.
media. It wasn't like that. And then we got Instagram and then we got TikTok and then we got YouTube and this idea of social branding became a thing. And now there really are personas that we put forward on social media. There are certain things we choose to share and certain things that we don't. And of course, we always share the positive and beautiful things. But then there are the people who don't share those. But again, that's part of their persona, right? They're the kind of person who shares about not always positive things, who shares about mental health, who shares about, climate change, all that kind of stuff, right? And I'm wondering for me what the connection is between this idea of like, when we talk about the algorithms on social media, and it's like everybody is trying to find their brand and their persona, and the algorithm really fuels that, but it also fuels your behavior online
Yes.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Right? Like I feel like we're living in an age of branding. Who you are as a person is how you're branded. And it's really weird and bizarre.
I don't know if this is a term that's already coined, but I've been calling it kind of algorithmic consciousness, kind of the same way groups become
We're going to have
aware
to
of.
trademark this for you, Nikki.
I don't know if it really is a term, but
I'm
the
not
same way you
sure.
have class
I
consciousness.
think it is, but it means something different to what I think you're about to say it is.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I basically see it as becoming more aware, like more conscious of the way the algorithm changes you, the way you feel, the way you think about the world, the beliefs you have about the world. And I don't think many of us were really cognizant of that, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were
No.
using MySpace, Facebook. Um, you kind of didn't really think about that. And I think that
No.
those websites have also changed. Facebook has fundamentally changed. The kind of
Hmm.
content it pushes now is very different to what you saw on your newsfeed 10 years ago. You're no longer seeing friends and family. You're seeing points of view. You're seeing political ideologies. You're seeing um, personal opinions that have been kind of like said by these talk show hosts and these podcast hosts, and they have a kind of motivation to push certain ideologies. But I don't think many of us are really cognizant of like when we come across something on social media that's meant to make us angry and we get angry. I think we just get angry and then we move on to the
Yeah.
next post and we feel something else. And we move on to the next post and we feel something else.
It's like the
And
15 seconds of emotion.
15 seconds of
It's a
emotion.
merry-go-round and you just get 15 seconds each time and you just keep going.
And you're not really making that choice. Like you're not making the choice to, I'm going to read something that's going to be kind of, it's going to make me angry, like
Hmm.
you're kind of just like on there and it's happening to you. And so I think we are reaching this point of algorithmic consciousness where more and more people are talking about the way behaviors change. You had the Cambridge Analytica scandal a couple of years back.
Hmm.
That was a pretty big, I think, inflection point for this conversation. Um, Elon Musk buying X, Mark
I
Zuckerberg
refuse to
coming
call
out.
it X. I still call it Twitter because
I
I
call
think
it
X is
Twitter
just so
too.
stupid.
You know, Zuckerberg talking about masculinity in the workplace.
Yeah. Which
They
is
have a
interesting. You know, in Trump's first campaign, he was actually not openly not supportive of
yeah,
Trump, and he established his DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at Meta, which yeah, no, it was at Meta, specifically in retaliation to Trump at the time. Isn't that
yeah.
interesting?
It's interesting, and I also think it's very indicative of like the moralizing of these tech companies, and they kind of
Hmm.
go along with things as long as it's profitable for them, and as soon as it isn't,
Exactly.
they're willing to like say, well, diversity isn't a focus for us anymore.
Hmm.
You know, Google's philosophy used to be don't be evil, and they got rid of that a couple of years ago too. So I
Yeah,
think
and then
there
they
is
recently
this,
signed like a contract with the military as well.
yes.
They're like,
So
don't be
yeah,
evil, and then they got rid of it and then signed this contract.
and unfortunately, we are all kind of in their ecosystem. So
We
it's very
are.
hard to live outside of Google, you know, Google Maps, Google Mail, Google Photos, Google, like we are in these walled gardens. And I do worry about what that means for information. A lot of people trust the answers they get from AI engines, and they're called
Hmm.
answer engines. So you don't get a bunch of links through you, that you get an answer. And so if you believe the answer every single time, that's quite a powerful kind of thing to change minds, change hearts. And it's meant to be this kind of unbiased, well-researched answer. And they're finding that they have a lot of bias, they have a lot of fake references, they hallucinate, but people don't question it. And so it is a bit scary to think about when these huge tech companies can control the flow of information, especially information that's supposed to be unbiased. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that
Well,
answered
it's
your
not
question.
really anymore, is it? Because, no, it did, but it's not really anymore, is it? So we're going now down the path of a lack of censorship under the guise of free speech and a lack of
Mm,
censorship. So censorship is biased. It is.
mm, mm.
And censorship is its own double-edged sword. I do support it on social media platforms because I think social media platforms, I mean, when they go rogue, it's just they have the power to sway public opinion.
Mm.
But the reality is that we are kind of seeing, we're seeing just the most bizarre and weird kind of shift on these
Mm.
platforms. And to touch on one of the things that you were saying, you use this beautiful statement. What was it about the garden? You called it a walled garden. Is that
Or the
right?
walled
Or
garden, yeah.
the walled garden, which is such a beautiful way to describe it. But I think a lot of people might feel a little bit trapped, right? Because social media has become our access to the world. In absence of social media, you might feel a little bit disassociated
Mm,
or
mm,
disconnected.
mm.
And so what these platforms do is part of the incentive of remaining on them is that this has become our form of connection.
Yeah,
But the other thing that it's done for a lot of people is that I think it's diminished critical thinking skills.
yeah,
So we always see these posts on social media with little snippets of information. And there's always the thing that says, link in bio to read more. No one clicks the link in bio. I don't
mm,
even click the link
mm,
in bio,
mm.
right? And what that's done is that it's normalized taking things at face value.
Mhm,
And I think
mhm.
that's the same with what you're talking about as well with these, these large language models and these AI generated tools. They're giving you information. They're not giving you links to the sources of that information. And because we're so used to not scavenging for those sources anymore, we just accept them at face value. And
Yep,
you're absolutely right that they have so much power to sway public opinion and to sway our beliefs and our values and kind of like our direction as well. It's really,
absolutely.
like, I don't want to be all doomsday about it, but it is quite scary to see the way it's going. And like you and I are probably, not probably, we are the first generation of people where social media became apparent in our lifetime.
Mm.
But there are these new generations where social media is and it exists from the beginning, like it is already
Yep,
part of their world.
yep.
So you and I
They're
know,
natives, you know. They're natives. You have this really interesting coalescence of like shortening attention spans, less critical thinking,
hmm
kind of the rise of misinformation. And then you also have governments supporting misinformation. So
yes.
you kind of, it's very hard to find the truth. And I don't blame young people's kind of disillusionment with mainstream media or traditional news, because that is kind of a symptom. rather than kind of the cause of the problem. Um, we have kind of had a devaluing of journalism over the last decade, which is another extension of like devaluing of human labor. We think we can replace journalists with AI. We think we can replace everything
Mm.
with automation, and automation is very useful. I love automation and it can help humans get a lot more out of their time. But I do think that it's often used for profit, just profit. And at
Yeah.
the cost of real news, at the cost of researching, at the cost of critically checking sources. And there is one more thing, which is the education of young people on the tools that they're using. So when we were in
Hmm.
high school, we watched Behind the News, and that was basically to teach us to differentiate between entertainment and news, sensationalism and news. And I don't think there is an equivalent really for
It's a
online.
really good point.
And I think we need that education, and more so than banning social media, more so than telling your kids they can't use the internet anymore. Um, Education is the best tool for them because they will use it. And if they're not educated on how these things work, they're more likely to be kind of wrapped up in kind of echo chambers and more dogmatic approaches to life that really take hold online. Manosphere content, like there's so many like versions
Yeah.
of this online, the wellness to pseudoscience pipeline. But you can't stop people from using these technologies.
You
The
can't.
best thing you can do is teach people how that tech, or how certain posts may be worded to elicit certain responses, to take note of your own responses and step away when you feel like you're kind of reaching a point of, oh, I'm really angry using social media, or I'm really depressed. Or it's starting to change the way I view myself. I mean, I know a lot of millennials talked about this with TikTok, about kind of the filters and Instagram face and the fear of aging. Your
Yeah.
photos are online forever. And so you can just go back and look at all these photos of yourself from 10 years ago and be like, what happened to me? Like, I'm a different person. I look different. And
Have
no
you
one around me
seen
is
that
aging
thing where
anymore.
it's like you look back on photos of yourself when you thought you were fat and now you're really fat? And then you're just like, why did, and sorry, were you saying
Why did
that
I
just
care back
reminded me?
then? But yeah,
It's perspective.
it's perspective. And like, we also kind of get stuck in a certain way, I think, with algorithms. Like they don't allow for that natural evolution of like, oh, I believed this when I was this age. And now I don't believe that anymore. I've grown up. I've
Yeah.
questioned things. Algorithms kind of keep you stuck in a sense. And it's why people get so stuck in their views. And they're so reluctant to hear something that's different to their views. And I don't think that's specific to any specific political party. I think certain political groups have weaponized social media a lot better. But
Hmm.
I do think it's kind of all of us in a way that we're less and less able to be resilient to other viewpoints. There is an extremism that develops with that sort of mindset where you
Far right and far left.
far out and far left, where you
Yeah.
can no longer reach the consensus needed to make governments work for you. You kind of do
Hmm.
need to reach consensus. Governments are supposed to kind of serve everybody, but it's this us or them mentality.
Yeah.
And it makes way for authoritarianism. And we kind of know that, like, we know that historically. Um, but once again, I do think the solution to this in part is education. I think we all need to get a lot better at understanding the technology we use. I don't really feel like I know as much about the technology that I use as I should.
I think it's deliberately opaque.
Deliberately opaque, and
Yeah.
of course, the less questions you ask, the better a consumer you are. So,
Absolutely. So then on this topic of education, and we were talking before about, the digital twins that
mm,
H&M are using and kind of the impact on the labor industry of modeling.
mm, mm.
What kind of education would you need specifically for the models? Like when they're stepping into something like this, what should they know?
I think you need to know how these models are built.
Hmm.
Starting at the inception point, how are they built? Who are they built by? What company owns them? What are their incentives? What are their motives? Just knowing that can really help elucidate a lot of
Yeah.
things. I also think that knowing about tech policy is pretty important here, because there is kind of a mythology around tech about its inevitability. And it's
Yeah.
inevitable that you will be exploited. It's inevitable that you will lose your privacy. That's the price you pay for convenience. And I think it's important for our generation to really question that. And I call it like textploitation, which is like we
I
kind of
love all of your language that you use. You've used so many wonderful terms.
I feel like that it kind of explains what it is because,
It does, yeah.
the story we've been told is like, if the product is free, you're the product.
Yeah.
And the thesis put forth in that book, Surveillance Capitalism, is basically our behavior change is the raw material that powers the product. So we're not really the product, it's the product's ability to change our mind and to get us to do certain things, buy certain things, think a certain way, and who's willing to pay for that. And we know there's lots of, powers that are willing to pay for that. So I think the recurring theme in all of this is the importance of the awareness, understanding like who has your data, how it's collected, how it's monetized. That will give you a very clear kind of picture of like what is being used, what about you is being used by this technology. And I also think reclaiming that personal agency, we kind of use social media and let it dictate what we see. Most of us kind of will interact with something that makes us angry, but I think we should actually start to really not let these technologies influence our emotions. I think we need to get better at hiding things that elicit negative reactions to the point where like it's ruining our mental health, stepping away from this technology, treating the internet a little bit more with a little bit more agency. We used to kind of go on like Tumblr and all these different websites and explore the internet. And
The
now we
rabbit
can
hole of like blogs and forums back in the day.
exactly. And I used to go on all sorts of websites, and I've realized recently that I kind of don't do that anymore. I'll visit
Well,
a
it's not
website.
recommended anymore, right? Like with Google, you've got to go onto like the ninth or 10th search page to
Yep.
find a non-generic website.
Yep. Google will prioritize the big legacy brands. Instagram, Facebook, they prioritize big legacy brands because they're the ones that they have kind of partnerships with. So we are kind of being given this convenience of convenient content, and it limits our exploration of the internet. And by extension, it does limit your exploration of yourself, your own interests. You're kind of being told these are your interests, these are the websites you like. Click into them for like 7 minutes and come back to our social media platform. So we're being guided through these walled gardens in a way. So I think those two things, really like education and getting to know these companies, these platforms, and getting to know the legislation around it so we can vote in order to protect our privacy, our interests, ourselves. And unfortunately, policy and legislation move slowly.
They do.
And, there's a lot of companies that very much want it to move slowly. But I do think that's our power, is our ability to hold these companies responsible, and give them guardrails, which they currently don't have at all.
No, they don't. I think this is a perfect segue into our last question, which is the question I ask all of my guests. And it's, what is one piece of advice that you can give to people for engaging with technology safely and responsibly? So what is your one responsible bite?
My one responsible bite is read the terms and conditions where you can. I actually think that we lose a lot of information that could help us when we breeze over these things, and there's a lot of tools that can synthesize that down to make it easier to read so you actually know what you're saying yes to. I think we need to normalize that a lot more.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I'm somebody who advocates for this as well, but I don't actually read because, this is, part of when we're talking about policy, all jokes aside, they tell you, I accept the terms and conditions, and then terms and conditions has a link. And then if you click that link, that's when you get to like the 30, 50 odd pages of the terms and conditions. They deliberately make it so that you have to click a second link to access it, and they deliberately make it very, very long. And so statistically speaking, very few people are going to, myself included, are going to accept or just read all of those terms and conditions before they accept them. So I think this just goes back to the point that you were talking about before around policy and legislation. Like maybe it does have to become policy and legislation that they have to give us like the highlight reel of these
Yeah.
terms and conditions. What are the key points I need to take away here? Like, are you going to own my house when I click yes to this,
Well,
or how
yeah.
does this work?
The power needs to be a bit more equal because right now it's
Yeah,
not equal at all. And
it's not.
there is one more thing I want to mention, which kind of is an extension of the walled garden, which is the rise of more decentralized social platforms like Blue Sky. So that whole premise is it's a different way of surfing the net. It's much more controlled by you. It's much more decentralized. If someone comes into a company and changes the way the algorithm works, you can go and take your information and go somewhere else. And
Yeah.
I think that is the next step here, which is kind of supporting the companies that have a more human approach to social media, and less of an algorithmic approach.
Yeah, and they are doing an Instagram equivalent, which is called Flashes, and it's released for iPhones, I'm pretty sure, but
Mm.
not for Android yet. So
Oh, I
keep,
haven't heard of that, so I will check that out.
yeah, it's called Flashes. So for if you're an iPhone user, you can download it. I'm an Android user, so not yet, but I did completely quit Twitter, which I refuse to call
Oh,
X,
yes.
and I
I
am
see
on Blue
Twitter.
Sky. So I've made that transition, and then once Flashes becomes available, like I do hope to slowly transition off of
Yep,
Instagram,
me
but slowly
too.
because I think I'm going to get the withdrawals a little bit.
We're all going to get the withdrawals, but we've moved from social platforms so many times over the last decade. We've gone from
That's true.
MySpace to Facebook, Facebook to Instagram, Instagram to TikTok. So I think we are very much capable of unraveling ourselves from these tech companies, and we should. Um, and the way we do that is by each of us individually, one by one, moving over to these more, I think, egalitarian social platforms. And yeah, you can't have an egalitarian social platform when one person controls an entire engine about what you see. That's very controlled by somebody else. So the decentralized kind of social networks is the next step in the evolution of all this. And I do hope that we do kind of make that jump slowly, even if it takes a bit of time.
That's a really optimistic point, I think, for us to end on. Nikki, you've been so wonderful. You've been amazing to talk to. You've had all of these love. I'm going to actually, in the description, I'm going to put all of these like wonderful terms that you've introduced me to along this journey with the timestamps because they've been fantastic. And I will also leave details to all of your socials and where people can find you in our show notes. But again, thank you so much. You've been honestly incredible to chat to.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun and interesting. Looking
I'm
forward to
so
our next
glad.
one.
Yes, there will definitely have to be a next one. There's so much more I want to unpack with you.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thank